as a Christian, I obviously don't condone what Cawthorn has done in his past. But to side against Cawthorn in this situation is to side with Kevin McCarthy, the mainstream media, and the political establishment. Is the precedent we want to set that anytime a conservative poses a threat to the political establishment, the establishment can blackmail them into ending their career and replacing them with some pro-amnesty neocon. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Wanted to do a quick video today talking about the big primary elections we saw last night in Pennsylvania and North Carolina, which many would argue were a mixed bag for the America First movement, quite frankly, but we're going to break it all down. But first, be sure to like and subscribe for epic and cool conservative content. Did you do it? Did you do it? Okay. Well, the first thing I wanted to go over is something we've talked about on a few streams, and that is Madison Cawthorn. Now, Madison Cawthorn lost his primary election last night, and he lost because of leaked pictures and videos of him that I will not show, but I will say were quite sexually degenerate, we will say, in nature. And he was mired in scandal, and he just straight up lost because of it, plain and simple. Now, I don't know much about the guy who's replacing him, other than that he's pro-amnesty, but I've heard from some people that he's a complete neocon. I've heard from others that he's just a run-of-the-mill Republican, to which I say, what's the difference? Now, is it the end of the world? No, it's just one congressional seat, and quite frankly, there is an argument to be made that Cawthorn really screwed himself over, so it's not a huge deal. But what I will say is that I objectively don't think that this is a good thing for us that this happened, and conservatives who are celebrating it because they think Cawthorn is a fool need to see the bigger picture here, which is this. Look, as a Christian, I obviously don't condone what Cawthorn has done in his past. It's wrong. I don't know his personal relationship with God. I hope he's repentant of it. We all have our own struggles with vice, but it's definitely not right. You know, I'm not going to be one of these people that's like, yo, Madison sussy with the bros. That's based. No, it's not based. It's obviously wrong. Don't be an idiot. But with that said, it's important to recognize what really happened here. And what happened here was blackmail by the political establishment. You see, over the past few months, Madison Cawthorn has been moving further and further to the right. He basically, at the height of the Russian invasion, was the first Republican to call Vladimir Zelensky a thug and said that the Ukrainian government was corrupt, which was epic. He started retweeting APU, which, thank you, by the way, and he releases this whole Agenda for America video that was actually, relatively speaking, pretty solid and focused a lot on pro-family policy. And then he really threw some flames when he basically called out the cocaine orgies that top DC politicians were engaging in, which, by the way, are real, okay? So this guy had been flying close to the sun for a while, but it was really when he called out the sex and cocaine addictions of Washington, D.C. that then these tapes were magically released. Yeah, don't be naive. It's pretty clear what happened here. It's pretty obvious that what Cawthorn was alleging was true. The political establishment was not happy that he said that, and they released this stuff to ruin his career as blackmail. And from where I'm standing, it seems pretty clear that Kevin McCarthy himself was probably behind all of this. So I will acknowledge, you know, that there is something of a moral dilemma here, but to side against Cawthorn in this situation is to side with Kevin McCarthy, the mainstream media, and the political establishment. And considering their intentions, that's just not something that I'm ready to do. Now, on Cawthorn's side, it is absolutely true that these tapes should not have existed in the first place, and that's his fault. But we all have dirt in our past, you know, not necessarily on the level of Cawthorn, but I think all of us have something out there that could derail a career if it was dug up. Every single person in America has something like that. That's why cancel culture is able to exist. But is this the precedent that we want to set? Is the precedent we want to set that anytime a conservative poses a threat to the political establishment, the establishment can blackmail them into ending their career and replacing them with some pro-amnesty neocon? Because that's exactly what happened, and that's exactly what all of the anti-Cawthorn people voted for. Which, again, you know, is not the end of the world, okay? People are going to say I'm coping about this. I'm really not, because, like I said, it's not a huge deal. I'm less concerned with Cawthorn and more concerned with the precedent being set here. And I think it's a dangerous game we're playing to let Kevin McCarthy get away with something like this. Because who's next? Who's going to go after next? They already tried this with Matt Gaetz. Who's next? Paul Gosar? Marjorie Taylor Greene? Maybe they'll do this with J.D. Vance or Anthony Sabatini or any of our future people we're expecting in Congress. It's a dangerous thing I think we're playing. And I know that people are going to say, how can you call yourself a Christian and excuse his sin? And it's like, I'm not excusing what he did. But I just want to recognize the nuance of this situation. I mean, honestly, the same thing is true of Trump's personal life, which, by the way, I guarantee you that the rest of DC, the people who took him out, are far more degenerate than Madison Cawthorn is. So really, it's like pick your poison there, okay? Now, on the bright side, America First candidates did see some pretty big victories elsewhere in North Carolina. Ted Budd is great on the issues, and he cleaned house in the Senate race. We're going to have a pretty solid Republican senator there. Bo Hines overcame a crowded primary field to win his race. Sandy Smith is a pretty underlooked one. She's basically a grassroots America First candidate who overcame a smear campaign to win her congressional primary. So it's pretty obvious that Cawthorn only lost because of scandal and not ideology, because as we can see, these other America First candidates in the state did great, and that's good to see. Now, the next race we have to talk about is Doug Mastriano winning the governor's primary in Pennsylvania. I do have to apologize for some past statements here because some of you pro-Barletta people in the community basically psyoped me. A few weeks ago, I was on stream and I was like, oh, I don't know much about the Pennsylvania Senate race, but I know there's a candidate who is more electable and there's a candidate who's more conservative, and I'm with the guy who's more conservative, and you guys told me that the more conservative one was Barletta when it was actually Mastriano. So some of you did a little bit of trolling there, kind of got me confused, but so I apologize. I was behind Mastriano, and Mastriano, I mean, this guy seems really solid. He's big on election integrity, and he calls himself a Christian nationalist, which is freaking epic. He is the further right candidate in this race, and Trump gave him the endorsement, even though the establishment people thought he was unelectable, and I thought that was a really good thing for the Overton window. Now, to people who say that he's too extreme for Pennsylvania, I just have to say here simply, you're wrong. You see, the Midwest is not legacy GOP country. The Midwest is Trump country. The Republican Party is not popular in the Rust Belt. Donald Trump is popular in the Rust Belt. And this is something that I talked about in my speech in Ohio last month. Shameless plug there. But as I've said for a long time, we need statewide office holders in the Midwest, in Trump country, that actually reflect Donald Trump's movement. In theory, the most America First candidates should come out of places like Ohio, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. The states that carried Trump to victory in 2016. We don't have that right now, but the good news is, we're going to have J.D. Vance in Ohio soon, which will be great. But I would argue that Governor Doug Mastriano will basically have the chance to transform the political identity of Pennsylvania in the same way that Ron DeSantis has in Florida. And so, Lou Barletta was not a bad guy. I think he was a decent candidate, but frankly, we have to be pushing the envelope there, and we shouldn't be scared of doing that because MAGA, America First, is what is popular in the Rust Belt, and we need to kind of reflect that. We need to start solidifying the new identity of the Midwest in the long term, and Doug Mastriano and J.D. Vance will help change the identities of some of the GOPs up there, and that's great to see, and I'm fully behind it, and I think people need to understand this, but I trust the plan, okay? We will transform the Rust Belt. Trump was the start. Vance is going to help do it. Mastriano is going to help do it. But you need the populist America First warriors in those regions of the country if you want to change things in the long term, which Mastriano is. Barletta is okay, not entirely the best. And so I think Mastriano, I think it's a great thing. And he cleaned house, so he's going to be the next governor. You can take that to the bank barring certain things. Okay, now lastly, we have to talk about the Dr. Oz race for the Pennsylvania Senate. Now, this race was just a disaster, however you want to put it. You have Dr. Oz, who was the Trump-endorsed candidate and ran a pretty solid campaign, but nobody really trusts him because he has a long career of social liberalism. Some say he was just playing the game for Hollywood, but I still think that's a red flag. He's like a Muslim-Turkish dual citizen, which is a little bit sus. But at the same time, he is friends with Trump. And so the theory is that Trump will get him to fall in line. Now, my personal opinion is that Oz will basically just be a standard Republican. Not great, but I don't think he'll be like Mitt Romney or something like people are saying. I think he would fall in line, but I see why people don't trust him because I don't really trust him either. Now, because of that, a lot of people went over to Kathy Barnett, who is like the based MAGA black lady in this race. Okay, that's basically what she is. That is the best way to say it.
Oh, look at my African American over here. Look at him. Are you the greatest?
Plays identity politics a little bit too much, but overall, a pretty far-right candidate, smeared by Sean Hannity for peacefully marching on the 6th. Really, the America First person in this race. Now, many people said she was too extreme. Now, even though Trump endorsed Oz, a lot of the MAGA vote went to Barnett because a lot of people didn't trust Oz for legitimate reasons. And that kind of vote sharing, right, the vote splitting, has led this to be a razor-thin race between Oz and David McCormick, who is basically a globalist neocon. I mean, he is absolutely awful. Now, it's looking like Oz is probably going to pull it out. We'll have to see what happens in the recount. But this was a very close call, to say the least. Now, I see a lot of blame going around for this. People are saying, like, Jack Posobiec and even Red Eagle Politics are about to hand us McCormick and it's their fault. But truthfully, I would argue that the real reason why Kathy Barnett was able to split the vote is not because of Jack's fault or Red Eagle or whoever else. It is because Dr. Oz sucked as a candidate. That's the only reason. If Oz were good, Kathy Barnett wouldn't be a factor. You know, people would not be looking for a better alternative if Oz were a solidly convincing candidate. And so my opinion, that's really where we ought to place the blame in all of this. Oz was just a bad candidate, which really leads me to my closing argument in this video, because you're going to see a lot of headlines from the media saying things like, Donald Trump is losing his influence in the Republican Party because of Madison Cawthorn and Dr. Oz struggling. And when I look at last night's election, I don't think that's true at all. If anything, it's the opposite. Now, Donald Trump's endorsement may not be infallible anymore, which in my opinion is actually a good thing because a lot of them suck, and it's good that voters have started to realize, hey, Trump actually endorses a lot of neocons, so we need to do our own research here. But Trumpism as a movement, not the endorsement necessarily, but the movement of Trumpism is stronger than ever. We know that because Kathy Barnett gained traction only because of the popularity of America First within the Republican Party. That's the reason why she got people to break ship. Doug Mastriano and Ted Budd won by huge margins, and they are both incredibly conservative, incredibly pro-Trump. So the only thing we learned from last night is that Trump's endorsement can't overcome a terrible candidate all the time, which Cawthorn was because of his scandals and Oz was because of his past. So the lesson we ought to learn here is simply pick good candidates. It's that simple. You know, it's not that complicated. So long as you pick good, solid America First candidates who are viable, you get pretty easy victories. You got Vance, you got Mastriano, you got Budd, Hines, many such others. It's so true. Okay, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. I know we don't usually do these type of political analysis videos, but I feel like it would be good. Something different, something fitting. We had to talk about it. So with that said, be sure to check out the merch. Link in the description. Like and subscribe. Alpha moves only. God bless and peace.
Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo as long